They laughed when she walked into the ranch auction, wearing the same faded dress she'd worn for years. Some people tried to hide their smiles. Others didn't bother. The young woman stood near the back of the crowded auction hall, holding a small folder against her chest, while wealthy ranchers discussed land, cattle, and millions of dollars. She looked completely out of place. Her boots were worn. Her dress was faded. And everyone knew her family's farm was failing. Then one man looked at her and laughed. Maybe she came here to sell that dress. A few people laughed with him. The young woman lowered her eyes. She didn't argue. She didn't fight back. She simply tightened her grip on the folder. But someone else had been watching. A millionaire rancher named Daniel Hayes stood near the entrance. He hadn't said a word since he arrived. He was known throughout the county as one of the wealthiest ranchers in the region. And when Daniel looked at the people laughing at the girl, something about his expression changed. He walked toward her. The room slowly became quiet. Daniel stopped beside the young woman. Then he looked at the man who had mocked her. And instead of saying anything, he reached into his coat. What happened next would change the girl's life. But that wasn't even the strangest part of the story. Because Daniel hadn't come to the auction to buy cattle. He had come looking for land. And the land he wanted was hers. Her name was Emma Carter. She was 23 years old and lived with her father on a failing ranch several miles outside the town of Red Creek. The ranch had once been productive. Decades earlier, cattle had covered the northern fields. The barns had been full. The fences had been maintained, and the Carter family had been respected throughout the county. But by the time Emma inherited responsibility for the property, almost everything had changed. The cattle were gone. The equipment was old. The farmhouse needed repairs. And the bank had already warned her father that the property would eventually have to be sold. Then, 6 months before the auction, Emma's father died. He left her the ranch. He also left her one final warning. Never sell the north pasture. Emma never understood why. The northern section was the least valuable part of the property. The grass was thin. The soil was rocky. Nothing grew there consistently. Even the previous owners had avoided it. So when Emma refused to sell that portion of the ranch, people assumed grief had made her irrational. They called the farm worthless. They called Emma stubborn. And eventually, they started calling her foolish. Then, Daniel Hayes arrived in Red Creek. He had been purchasing ranches throughout the region. And everyone assumed Emma's property would be next. That morning, Emma had come to the auction hoping to find a buyer for some old equipment. Instead, she became the target of the entire room, until Daniel Hayes walked toward her. And the first thing he asked wasn't about the dress. It was about the north pasture. Your father ever tell you why he wouldn't sell that land? Emma froze, because nobody had ever asked her that question before. Emma stared at Daniel. How do you know about the north pasture? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked through the auction hall windows toward the distant hills. I've been studying the old property records. Emma frowned. For what? Because your ranch is sitting on something people have forgotten. Those words changed everything. Daniel told Emma that he'd spent several months researching historical land surveys in the county. And there was something strange about her property. The original maps didn't match the modern ones. A section of the northern pasture had been marked differently, more than 80 years ago. There were measurements on the old documents that no longer appeared on official records. And beneath one faded notation were 2 words: water reserve. Emma couldn't believe it. Her father had never mentioned a water reserve. But when she returned home that evening, she remembered something. A small metal box. Her father had kept it locked inside an old cabinet in his bedroom. Emma had seen it many times. She had simply never opened it. That night, she found the key. Inside the box were old photographs, handwritten measurements, a rusted compass, and a folded map. There was also a letter. Emma unfolded it carefully. It contained only a few sentences. Her father's handwriting was shaky, but one sentence stood out. If they ever come for the northern field, remember what I told you. The water is still down there. Emma read it twice, then a third time. Daniel studied the map, and suddenly he understood why her father had refused to sell. The northern pasture wasn't worthless. It was sitting above an old underground water system. But there was a problem. Nobody knew whether it still existed. The next morning, Daniel brought in a local land surveyor. They walked across the pasture for hours. They checked elevations. They studied the soil. They examined old stone markers buried beneath the grass. Then the surveyor stopped. He pointed toward a patch of land near the tree line. Something's underneath here. Emma looked down. At first, she saw nothing. Then Daniel noticed something else. The grass in that particular area was greener than everything surrounding it. Even though the region had experienced weeks without meaningful rain, they began clearing the vegetation. And beneath the grass, they found old stones. Not natural stones. A structure, carefully placed. And beneath it was a rusted iron ring attached to a wooden panel. Emma grabbed the ring. Daniel stopped her. Wait. They brought in proper equipment. They checked the air. They secured the area. Then, slowly, they lifted the panel. A cold rush of air came from below. Emma stepped backward. There was an opening beneath the pasture, a shaft, and it descended into darkness. Daniel shined a light downward. The beam disappeared far below. Then they heard something. Water. Very faint, but unmistakable. Running water. Emma looked at Daniel. My father knew. Daniel nodded. But there was something else. The old map showed the underground passage continuing far beyond the northern pasture, and part of it had been deliberately crossed out. Someone had wanted that section forgotten. Few days later, Daniel brought in a professional underground inspection team. They didn't enter the shaft carelessly. The structure was decades old. Some of the wooden supports had deteriorated. The air had to be tested. Ropes were secured. Gas detectors were checked. Emergency communication equipment was prepared. Then the team descended. 20 feet, 30 feet, nearly 50 feet beneath the surface. They reached the bottom. There, hidden beneath Emma's pasture, was an underground tunnel. It wasn't a natural cave. Someone had built it. The walls had been reinforced with stone. Old wooden supports crossed the ceiling. And along one side were rusted metal rails. The team followed the tunnel. The sound of water became louder. Then they reached a massive underground chamber. And there it was, an enormous stone reservoir. Still holding water, the system had been built generations earlier to collect and distribute groundwater throughout the surrounding farmland. But decades ago, the system had been abandoned. Part of it had been sealed. And the old map suggested that the reservoir extended far beyond Emma's property. The ranch everyone had called worthless was sitting above one of the largest forgotten water systems in the area. News spread quickly. The same people who had laughed at Emma suddenly wanted to speak with her. Land developers arrived. Investors called. Ranchers who had ignored her for years suddenly offered to buy the property. Some offered enormous amounts of money. But Daniel didn't make an offer. Instead, he asked Emma one question. What do you want to do? Emma looked across the northern pasture. For the first time, she understood why her father had protected it. He hadn't been protecting worthless land. He had been protecting the future of their family. But Emma still had one problem. The bank was preparing to take the ranch. So Daniel did something nobody expected. He paid off the debt. Not by buying the ranch. Not by taking control of the water. He simply cleared the debt and helped Emma establish legal rights to the underground system. When Emma asked him why, Daniel gave her a simple answer. Because your father was right. Then he paused. He wasn't protecting the land from people. He was protecting it for you. Weeks later, Emma returned to Red Creek. She wore the same faded dress, the same worn boots, and the same expression she had worn on the day everyone laughed at her. But this time, the room was different. The people who had mocked her were silent. The man who had joked about her dress couldn't even look her in the eye. Emma walked past them. Daniel followed several steps behind. Someone finally asked him, "Why didn't you just buy the ranch?" Daniel looked at Emma. Then he smiled. Because it was never mine to take. Emma didn't become wealthy overnight. She didn't need to. She had something far more important. Her family's ranch, her father's secret, and a future that nobody could take from her. The faded dress that everyone had laughed at eventually became a reminder of something Emma never forgot. People can judge what they see, without having any idea what's hidden underneath. And beneath Emma Carter's forgotten pasture, there had been an entire world waiting to be discovered. A world her father had protected for decades, and a future that began with one millionaire rancher deciding not to laugh,